Um, I broke this down. I told Sensei and Shihan that I did this for myself because I wanted to educate myself on. We talk about Budo and what it means. It's a little bit of a foreign concept for certainly Americans and Western cultures. So in this process, I was reading a ton. I didn't write that much. I collected a lot of things, about 10 pages as you saw. And I'm not going to read those 10 pages. But what's important is from our perspective, the Japanese influence on our martial art. It's really broken down into sort of three of the most recent periods in Japanese history. So you have the Edo period, which was basically 450 years ago to about 1868, let's say. So that time frame, the Japanese social organization was really a military structure in the country. It was controlled, like basically states were controlled by lords. The Tokugawa's clan ruled that. We've met through Shihan. A Tokugawa. I have a picture with my wife and I. Yes, oh, there he is. He's on the wall right there. National treasure of Japan, actually. So the Tokugawas controlled Japan, and their military force or class, it was a class-based system then. You had the samurai. There was about maybe 5% of the whole population were samurais. They were the enforcers. They were the ones that maintained the rule of law for the lords that controlled these different prefectures or territories. And the code of conduct for the samurai warrior was called Bushido. And there were concepts around that before, but it was formalized in this period under the Tokugawas, where, and I'll read through some of the conduct. It's very similar. Bushido is very similar to chivalry in Europe, in British Empire specifically. The concepts are nearly identical, ironically, because really at that time, the British Empire ruled roughly 25% of the whole world. 25% of the whole population was controlled by the king of England, bizarre as that sounds. Anyway, so because of that structure, those values and things started becoming inherited into just the general population of the Japanese. And we'll talk about how that changed over time, but it became a fabric of the Japanese culture, and still to this day in business, in social organizations, and so forth. So these are the key parts of the Bushido principles, and you'll hear this through some later on as well. But gi is righteousness and integrity and justice. One of the things is in Japanese, a word is a symbol, but it has a very deep meaning. It's not like the word the. I mean, it has implications beyond just the literal translation to English. So these things have deeper meaning, and that's why there's more words that are associated with it. Yu, which is courage, valor, and heroism. Jin, which is benevolence, compassion. Rei, respect, courtesy, politeness. Makoto, honesty, sincerity. Loyalty as chugi, loyalty, fidelity. Self-control, can't pronounce this one. Sensei, maybe you can help me. Jisei, maybe?
Jisei.
Not too bad.
Not bad.
American. Can speak English very well. But that's self-control and discipline. So these were all critical attributes or precepts of being a samurai, and then that proliferated through the culture. Now, I mentioned 1868, 1867, which is 160 years ago or whatever, being an important time. That is the end of the Edo period, and the end of the Tokugawa shogunate rule of Japan. And what happened was they discontent and a bunch of things going on, but the emperor Meiji ended up being back in control, and now that emperor was in charge. So this is called the Meiji period, or the Meiji Restoration. The purpose was there was discontent, obviously, whenever you have a class system. A lot of people down at the bottom that aren't getting their share. And this was an undoing of that class system. So the beginning of the Meiji period was about undoing that. It was also about, there was a lot more influence from the British. The British Empire was there, so the British were in China, they were in Hong Kong. The Japanese were spreading out. They were, in what is now Korea, Manchuria, things like that. So there was a westernization of Japanese philosophy, not necessarily adopting it, but just an expansion of their current sort of mindset. There was a real focus on actually more interaction with a foreign country, so trade and business and politics and education. A lot of those things that are in the Japanese system now, like the education system, was adopted from Europe. They didn't have an education system under the class system. And so where Bushido was the code for the samurai warriors, in the Meiji period, you started seeing, because the samurai were ruled out, that class didn't exist anymore, you started to see the adoption into now this new period, and you saw things like Kano Sensei, who started judo. You hear the word do in a lot of things. Japan Karate Do Federation, Kendo, Judo, that's the way. And Funakoshi Sensei, who started, he's not on our wall, a lot of times he's on the walls in places. He created his own 20 precepts, and these 20 precepts were really derived from not only just the Bushido concepts, but then incorporating them into this modern society. So Kano Sensei was doing that in judo. Funakoshi was doing this in Okinawa. And then they formalized that when he came to Japan from Okinawa. And Kano Sensei was a big influence in him. That's why we wear these belts, and that's why we get these color. That was the judo system that they adopted. And so a lot of the success of Shotokan was a promotion by Kano because he was so well respected. He was a politician, he was educated. He could write, he did calligraphy. Those are like really important things back then when people were either a farmer and couldn't read and write, or you were a teacher, you were an educator. Funakoshi Sensei was also an educator. So he had the 20 principles, and I won't read all of those, but I'm gonna hit on a few of them for you. Don't forget that Karate Do begins and ends with Rei. I started out that way, you started the class out that way. I'm going to end this presentation that way. You meet someone, good morning, Sensei, how are you? Goodbye, arigato, gozaimasu. So that is when you go to Japan, like, it's not in the movies, it's every day, everywhere you go. There's no first strike in karate. So the concept of honor, respect, not being aggressive, was adopted in this time frame from a warrior mentality to a defender of honor, and karate adopted that. Karate stands on the side of justice. You use your karate for good, not for evil. We see people that don't do that, but that's bad Budo. That's not what we practice. That's not why we do it. Karate goes beyond the dojo, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Things that you learn in here around Budo, or lessons that you learn here, can be directly translated outside of the dojo and in your own personal life. And then karate is a lifelong pursuit. I'm just a mere grasshopper. 26 years, Marty Sensei's 40 some years. Shihan is more than that. So this is in the sort of late 1800s, early, up to, let's say, right before World War II. Then you switch into what was referred to as the modern period, and there's actually more formal period names around these times in Japan, but for the purposes of this, we'll just call it the modern period. Japan was going through some things. They were locked up in Manchuria and fighting, and the emperor had died, which really was a sort of a transition, and they were moving now from a political structure that was around the emperor making the decisions to more of a democracy. And they were sort of full democracy, I think, in like 1915, 1920. And so you saw the integration at that point of these Budo aspects into the martial arts. Budo is martial, the way of martial arts, and versus the way of the warrior. And now you saw this integrated into lots of other things, in the culture, in the business. And in that training, in Shotokan specifically, they kind of boiled down to 20 precepts, and there's what's called the Dojo Kun, which are 5 guiding principles, and a lot of dojos actually recite these at the end of class. We don't, but some of the JKA schools will do that. Some other organizations that aren't even JKA will do it because of Funakoshi's influence, but it's, everything is, in Japanese, the word means first, like number one. In the list, everything is first. So all of these are first. First, seek perfection of character, seek be faithful, endeavor, respect others, and restrain from violent behavior. So those are the 5 dojo kun that would be recited in a lot of dojos, and is really the basis of what we would consider Budo inside of Shotokan, modern Shotokan karate. I'm going to talk a little bit here in my last few minutes about the seeking perfection of character, because when I started, to me, that's like, wow, that seems kind of hard. My wife would say impossible in my case, and partially true. But if you look at it from a Japanese perspective and what they mean by do, the path, the way, you never get there. You're always working on it. You're heading that direction, hopefully in the right way. But it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And if you view the perfection of character, that is sort of really the foundation of it, and that interpretation is different in Asia culture versus what I would consider classic American Western culture, like, oh, okay. So I have an analogy around that. I like to golf, as Shihan likes to tell people, I like to golf. When you're trying to improve in golf, people get hung up, they buy $600 drivers, and the ball goes farther, and it's got a higher spin rate, and I'm gonna play a left or right draw and take it over the tree and into the sand trap. It's like, guys hit buckets of balls for an hour with their driver. Half the strokes that you make on the golf course are with a putter. And nobody practices putting other than for knocking around a little bit. But on a par 72 hole, 36 of the strokes are with the putter. The simplest thing, when you're 3 years old, you get a club, they give you a putter, and you putty. Yet when you're older and you're trying to improve your golf game, I'm buying contraptions and things that aren't going to change my score, yet I feel like I'm making progress, but you're really not if your goal is to be a better golfer and shoot a lower score. So for me, I look at that and I say, you got to focus on the basics. We talk about focusing on the basics in the dojo. Kihon, the Japanese word is kihon. It seems like, why do I practice basics? Because I learned that. I learned the front stance. That's the very first thing you learn. When I was a yellow belt, and I sat back there in the day class because there was 2 rows of black belts, killers lined up every day. And I was always in the back, and I would warm up back there. And Marty Sensei, who's the highest ranked person, he would come in, get on the mat, he'd stand in the mirror, and he'd go like this. And he'd go down the mat, and I'm like, I learned that on the first day. And this guy what is he doing? And then I realized, like, probably should ask myself, why is he doing that? Why is the highest ranked black belt in the dojo working on his Zenkutsu Dachi and staring at the mirror? How egotistical. Then I thought, probably I should ask myself, why am I not standing in front of the mirror looking at myself in Zenkutsu Dachi? Because your mind's eye, it's horrible, it's a terrible liar. It tells you what you want to hear, what you want to see. You think your hand's in the right position. You think your knee is over your toe. You think your hips are turned to the side. And then Shihan comes by in class and goes, what are you doing? And you're like, oh shoot. In my brain, I think I'm doing that right. You have to get to a point where the self-correction, you're willing to look in the mirror and go, yeah, that ain't really that pretty. That's not the way I'm supposed to be doing it. So why am I doing it in my kata? So to me, that is the seeking the perfection of character. Part of it's on the mat that I translate to the outside, to the world. Like when you think that you are perceived some way because that's the way your mind's eye is, maybe figuratively look in the mirror and go, is that really what's going on? Am I really behaving that way? Am I really acting that way? Am I showing compassion? Am I showing honesty and so forth? So that's my interpretation of Buddha for myself. Other people have other ones. So in conclusion, wrap this up for everybody. One piece of advice, whether you're testing today or you're in the tournament tomorrow, you're in class on Monday, it's important to focus on the Kihon. And if you want to improve your perfection of character, you only need to do one thing. Practice your putting.